Welcome back. A study from Oxfam America finds families across the country are barely making ends meet, with many making less than 31K a year. Senior research advisor at Oxfam America, Kaitlyn Henderson, joins me for a discussion on livable wages for individuals and families across our country. Kaitlyn, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So, before we jump into the study, can you tell me a little bit about your organization, Oxfam America?
Yeah, absolutely. Oxfam is a global anti-poverty organization looking to sort of think through and create new solutions for poverty wherever it exists. And my program, my team is really focused domestically on the US, so looking at poverty within this country.
So, you led a study about low wages in our country. Can you tell me more about what actually just inspired it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think right now there are so many people really struggling to make ends meet. And we wanted to have a better idea of who are the people in this country that are having that hard time, that are working full time, but still can't quite afford to pay rent and keep food on their table. We wanted to have a better idea of who those people were, where they live, and knowledge is power, and so understanding who these communities are that are most impacted, the goal is to empower those same communities to have that information and advocate for themselves.
Now, new research finds that 31.9% of workers in the U.S. earn under $15 an hour. Federally, minimum wage remains at $7.25, which is really shocking. And it's a rate that hasn't moved since it began in 2009. How is this impacting families in our country?
Well, what it means to say that almost one third of workers in this country are making less than $15 an hour. That is equal to over 50 million people in the country. So these numbers are really staggering. We wanted to really hammer home that when we're talking about low wages, we're talking about millions of people. And just like you said, the federal minimum wage has been stuck at $7.25 for 13 years. And so working families cannot afford to keep a roof over their head and food on their tables, and it's totally unacceptable. So what we're looking at is real working poverty in this country that is impacting tens of millions of people unnecessarily.
Now, we're also experiencing inflation within our country at the moment. How does this further add to that financial stress?
Well, one thing to bear in mind is inflation is the highest it has been in over 4 decades. And when we're thinking about low wage workers, the impact of inflation hits particularly hard. What we know is that inflation is really impacting the cost of housing, the cost of gas, and the cost of food more than anything else. So everything that is the most essential for people to get from to where they need to go and also to eat and to survive is completely being impacted. And because wages have not kept up with these really insane rates of inflation, people just can't afford things. We know that this federal minimum wage of $7.25 has lost 21% of its value since it was last changed in 2009. And this just really is not acceptable.
Now, contrary to popular belief among certain individuals, people actually do want to work and they work very hard. Can you tell me how the pandemic has affected this, especially with those who are considered essential workers?
Yeah, absolutely. And I really want to reflect on what you just said. All work has dignity, and all work is really important and needs to be valued in this country. One of the things that happened in the last 2 years with the pandemic is a lot of the most important, valuable work that was often overlooked, the work of our janitors, the work of the people that pick and cook and deliver our food, the work of people in warehouses, was for once really celebrated and seen as absolutely essential. This work was celebrated also as with hero pay. These individuals were called heroes. But what we're seeing is that the true and literal heroes of the last 2 years are being paid a poverty wage. And this is not how we should be celebrating our heroes in this country.
Right. And I like that you mentioned that because it's like, it sounds nice, but like I can't pay bills being called a hero. So I'm really happy that you brought that up. Now, a really important part of this study is looking closer into the finding, especially regarding the demographics. Your study looked at race, gender, and the intersectionality of both of those identities, as well as age and whether people had children. Why did you want to break it down into so many different categories?
Well, it's really important to understand the identities of the individuals that are the most impacted by low wages. And what we know is identities are not singular. it was so important to kind of bear in mind all of the intersecting facts and features of a person's community and of their identity. So we wanted to focus on race because there has always historically in this country been a racial wage gap. And there is absolutely a gender wage gap, and that gap grows even wider when you think about women of color. And so it was really important to bear in mind all of those pieces. The reason we wanted to bring in age is because there is a common misconception that the majority of people that are low wage workers or minimum wage workers in this country are teenagers. That is absolutely not the case. In fact, 89% of adults are the ones who make less than $15 an hour. And then we wanted to think about family and family status because realistically, this is really impacting single parents. And we know due to the pandemic and the care crisis that we're facing in this country, one of the biggest issues is childcare. And so if single parents are the ones that are making these low wages, they absolutely cannot afford childcare. And so there are all of these really important policies that are layering on one another and making it harder for low wage working families to make ends meet. And it just should not be the case.
So I actually really appreciated seeing this breakdown, and I like to focus on the findings regarding gender. There's a very large disparity between women and men in the workforce, especially in regards to minimum wage. Can you kind of explain and walk us through that finding?
Yeah, absolutely. So what you're looking at here is a map of who in this country makes less than $15 an hour that are men, and it's color coded. So the lighter the color, the fewer the people are. Nationally speaking, about 25% of men make less than $15 an hour. But when we're thinking of women, which is this next map you see, 40% of women nationally are making less than $15 an hour. So just in general, those numbers are hugely different. But then when you're thinking not just about gender, men versus women, if you're also thinking about women of color and bringing that race component back in, those numbers get even worse. Whereas 40% of women in this country are making less than $15 an hour, a full 50% of women of color in this country are making less than $15 an hour, which is horrifying and totally unacceptable.
Now, we're actually going to put another graph on the screen, and if you take a look at that graph, only 25% of working men earn less than $15, while 40% of women workers earn less than $15. How are these low wages impacting women specifically?
Well, one of the things that we're really noticing, and again, that the pandemic made very clear, is a lot of the ways that we undervalue the work of women or work that is technically or traditionally considered women's work. And the jobs that really come to mind are childcare workers, domestic workers, teachers, nurses. There are a lot of jobs that are disproportionately held by women and are undervalued and underpaid. And so one of the reasons that we're seeing a disparity in men versus women and who makes low wages is the jobs that are being held, but also the reality that there is a gender gap, a gender wage gap in this country. Women do earn less than men. And when you bring race into that component as well, women of color earn even less than white women and certainly less than white men.
So we also see a very large disparity between white workers and Black and Latino workers, and you also have graphs for that as well. Can you explain what we're seeing on the maps?
Sure. So when we're thinking about nationally, there are 46%, of Black workers in this country who make less than $15 an hour. Sorry, 47% of Black workers in this country make less than $15 an hour, and 46% of Latino workers make less than $15 an hour. So these numbers are really shocking. It's almost half of those two communities are making less than $15 an hour. And if you look at the national map, the states, it varies pretty severely. So depending on where you live is really deciding whether or not you're able to afford things like housing and things like food.
Now, when posing the question, what can be done, Oxfam America says the solution is simple, the political will is weak. I really like that saying. Can you further explain?
Yeah, what that means is we already have solutions. In fact, there is a solution in front of Congress right now. It's called the Raise the Wage Act, we really want to celebrate the fact that the Raise the Wage Act is inspired by the Fight for 15. It was a movement started by workers in 2012. So there are policies and legislation in front of Congress today that's inspired by the work of inspired by workers advocating for themselves. And the great thing about that piece of legislation is it does a lot of the things that we think are really important. It gets rid of minimum wage exclusions, of which there are many. It ends sub minimum wages, which is certain jobs that you legally can be paid less than the minimum wage, depending on what the job is. And it gets rid of those exclusions, it gets rid of those exceptions, and raises everyone in the country to a $15 minimum wage by 2025. So there's no perfect solution. $15 an hour is still not quite enough for families, but it does some important work. The issue is not the policy. The issue is the fact that there is not the political will right now from Congress to push that and make it the law of the land. And that's what we're really missing.
I really like that you mentioned that even though like for some places the goal is 15, is still very, very low for many people across the country. And I definitely believe that it's going to be a fight that's ongoing. So I really appreciate your organization kind of showcasing this study. And I love the graphs and just looking at those demographics. I thought that was really helpful. Can you please tell us where people can go to learn more about this specific study and more about the work that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much. The work is available right now on our website. The interactive map where you can click on where you live and see a little bit more information is at www.oxfamamerica.org/low-wage-map 2022. And there you can see all the demographic information. You can click through all of the data, all of the maps, click your state, find out more. You can even see where your state compares to national averages.
All right, Kaitlyn, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much.
We'll be right back.